I've worked with amazing people, amazing at their work, working on something which is completely wrong.
Most people will start exploring tools as a silver bullet. Why do you think you need a tool? Performance and talent management is almost like a fingerprint. It's very unique to your company. We shouldn't compare and superimpose performance processes from other companies.
You spent almost the last 5 6 years of your life completely entrenched in performance, talking about talent, OKRs. Let's brainstorm performance and redesign performance, and let's keep it to a more larger audience, the larger cohort of companies which are mostly like pre-series A, or people who are established businesses, 100
Yeah,
plus, who are growing now, right? And because performance becomes important at this scale of your
yeah.
journey.
I've been in the US for a year. I've been with
Acha,
Klaar
wow.
for close to 2.5 years. And of course, I was in HR earlier. I've been with performance for the last 4 years, definitely part of my HR career, part of Klaar. And the first thing that I would say is where I've seen a lot of good HR leaders, what they do when they are redesigning performance. So two things can happen, right? Either, let's say you're at a 150 headcount strong company and you are redesigning performance from the ground up. Either there can be an existing performance process which was
Hmm.
happening in some shape or form, or there was no performance process and you're doing it from the literally from the ground up.
Hmm.
The second one is easier because you have a clean slate, right? And you can build the way that you want. The first one is tougher. So, what really good HR leaders have told me is that the first thing to understand is why do you want to do performance management, right? Because if we are not clear about this, it is another thing which HR is asking people to do, right? And people are already overloaded with work, no matter which company you're in. So unless we are clear about why we want to do it, we won't be able to justify the value prop to the people. So that is the first thing which we need to understand. And we have seen a lot of different companies have different reasons for doing performance. Some companies, majority VC funded companies, they want to do performance because they are very clear that they need to grow rapidly and they need to identify their top performers, retain their top performers, and of course build more top performers. The second one is to really understand your business. And this is where I have found in my HR career I could have done better. A lot of people I think could have done better, where your business operates a certain way. So once you understand how money is made in your business and how the business operates, that becomes your fundamental pillar of running performance management. I'll give you a very simple example. In my first company, which was Kraft Heinz is an FMCG or a CPG company in the US. And there is a huge frontline workforce of sales, right? Now, these people are out on the ground every single day, working 10 to 12, hours, knocking on, shops, retailers, etc. The way they will view performance or their goals, etc., is very different from a knowledge based company, like, let's say, a SaaS company, right? Where there's a bulk of engineers, right? So the performance process has to be tweaked to fit that narrative. Like, who is doing performance? That is the second point which we have
Okay.
understood over here. The third point is that what is the maturity level of your company? Again, very closely linked with the second point, but there is always a maturity curve which companies are on depending upon the workforce, their journey, etc. What is that level of maturity? And the fourth point, of course, is that what do I want the end outcome to be, and how comfortable am I in driving this particular process? So the number of steps, etc., will depend on that heavily as well, and also on the culture of the company.
Okay.
At the end of the day, what we have realized is that there is no one size fits all formula for performance management, just like HR, right? Um, it depends on all of these factors, and we have realized that performance and talent management is almost like a fingerprint. It's very unique to your company. We shouldn't compare and superimpose performance processes from other companies. Time and again, we have found it does not work for all of the reasons that I sort of mentioned. It's good to understand what the market is doing, but the market shouldn't dictate what is right for your company, is what we have understood now, after like 2.5 years.
Understood. Let's take an example. Let's say this is a SaaS company, 350 odd people. Maturity wise, they are, let's say, at a series D ish. They're in 2, 3 countries in Asia, let's say. And their objective at this point is obviously to retain and grow their best talent. And you are given the charge of redesigning performance process from the ground up.
Hmm.
Right? How would you implement this process? What would the steps be in your experience?
So the first part is clear, that the objective is to retain and grow your top talent, right?
Hmm.
What else do we expect? For example, what's been the performance of the company like? What's been the performance of certain teams, etc. Like, are there any particular reasons why we are focusing on performance management right now? Why is now the right time? So
Okay.
a clear practical example might be that Series D company, heavily focused on growth, maybe 2 3 years down the line wants to IPO. So then that narrative is very different from a Series A company, which is just starting to enter the growth phase. So if that is the ambition, laying the building blocks for a future IPO, then performance management has to be really methodical in this particular case. We need the process to have sufficient amount of data. We need to be able to show future investors that, hey, this is what we have done, from this year onwards. So that is number one, which I would do, is understand what else is required from over here, from the performance management process. Second, when we are redesigning, is how were things done at this point in time? Because Series D, I'm assuming there will be some sort of a goal framework. If not, you'll be will be surprised how many Series D companies don't have that.
Let's assume these guys have a simple, they do goals, they do twice a year.
We have seen two different sorts of performance approaches. One is linking goals with your performance. The second one is not linking goals. Performance is more of a feedback which helps you to
Okay.
perform better, but they are not necessarily linked with goals. Both approaches have their pros and cons. So the first one is structuring your goals over here. So if a simple KPI framework is working for the company, and what as leaders we should understand is, will it work for the next 2 to 3 years, which will lead into the IP, or 3 to 5 years? Will it
And
still work?
sorry, Sharthok, when you say working, what do you mean? Like, what's my measure of "Ki this is working"?
Let's say top three parameters which we should evaluate. Number one is performance on the right track? If performance itself is not on the right track, then it's very clear that we need to tweak our
Hmm.
approach to goals. Then my second parameter would be that by being a bull in a china shop, you can make performance happen. But is it happening the most effectively? Right? If five people are able to, should be able to do a thing, am I requiring 10 people to do that particular thing? The third one is, of course, that are people clear about what they are driving, and how much clarity do people have? Or is it just happening because, everything is under a constant state of, fire every day? We have been a part of such companies. So those are my three metrics. The process will vary depending on those answers. But let us say that we are focusing on performance management now because performance has been happening, but it needs to be expedited. It needs to grow at a much
Okay.
larger pace to IPO and so on. Then we will first check the goal architecture of it. Like, if we are just doing KPIs, if we are just doing KRAs, that is absolutely fine, right? But
Okay.
we need to understand why we might need to tweak the goal architecture, right? And like, we know there are different sorts of architectures. Like, there are OKRs, which receive their fair share of flack, and all of that. There are KPIs, KRAs, balance scorecards, etc. Even though they are used interchangeably, we have found that companies which use it intentionally fare much much better. What I mean by that is, what a lot of companies, working with them has taught me is that OKRs are excellent when it comes to positions and levels which have decision making authority, right? Where we are bothered about the outcome. OKRs are excellent over there when we are trying to translate strategy into, let's say, observable goals over here. But if you keep on cascading OKRs till the last mile, where after a point in time, the outcome is not in the hands of the people per se. I go back to that sales officer's example. It's a very grueling role where you knock on people's shops and you try and sell, your products. If you don't have a really strong brand behind you, how much can you sell? Right? I mean, your sales skill will only take you mentally forward. It is about covering a certain territory, doing it diligently, knowing your customers, and having that brand behind you. In those sort of roles, we are looking at output, we are not looking at outcomes, right? Or we are looking at throughput rather. Are they covering this territory? Are they covering 12 retailers, etc.? In that particular case, KPIs makes a lot more sense, right? Because OKRs might not make sense right over there. So to understand your population and to first devise the goal architecture of it, that what makes sense. But once goals are fixed, and I'm assuming that, let's say, people are bought in to the narrative, then helping people understand those or create those goals and doing that. The second thing which I would focus on, which I've seen a lot of companies miss out, is the cadence of goal check ins and conversations, right? Because what we usually find is, even if goal setting is happening, it's 12 months or it's 5 months and 6 months after which they are discussing about the goals, right? So the cadence of goal check-ins, it can be once in 15 days, once in 7 days, again depending on the maturity of the company. Once we have that cadence built in, so now what we have helped people do is understand their goals. And we are very clear that this is how the company will progress, right? So we are cascading our strategy to OKRs and then moving it down to, let's say, KPIs. There can be other approaches, balance scorecards, etc., if we want a more holistic outlook. Now, Series D company, once we have done this, we have set in the cadence as well. The next thing that we will focus on, employees require 3 to 4 things when it comes to performance management. You tell me what I'm supposed to drive, right? And you tell me why I'm supposed to drive it. This is the next part of the goals. So when we are cascading goals, communicating goals, down the line, one of the things which, Klaar, we have focused on as a software as well, is to immediately show people how their work is making an impact, right? Because if you're giving stretch goals, why are we giving you
Mhm.
stretch goals? And because it's making an impact to the overall company. That is the third part of the performance, which is often overlooked. That when we are communicating goals and when we are doing the cadences, who are the people who will be working with others? What resources do you have? What budgets, etc., do you have? Make it very clear, right? Because you can't set stretch goals without giving resources. That is a part of, definitely a part of performance. The fourth part would be that give me feedback in real time or help me improve. It can be real time feedback, it
Mhm.
can be something else, but help me improve. A common misconception is that continuous performance management replaces annual reviews.
What's the difference between continuous performance management and OKR check-ins?
Okay, let's say the Series D company is a SaaS company. I'll give an example. Let's say sales, right?
Hmm.
So in goal check-ins, what we usually find is that the check-in, of course, is very specific to that goal. Have you cracked these accounts? What we need to do? Have you done these
Hmm.
trainings and so on? Continuous feedback is that approach where we say, let's say me saying to one of my sellers that, hey, I have gone through your meeting recordings and notes, and this is not specific to any particular account. I feel that you need to do or spend more time in understanding the customer's problems. Continuous feedback
Okay.
is helping the individual become better across the individual's spectrum and not necessarily only for a particular goal. The person might also come and say that I'm a mid market AE. What I'm usually finding is that with software companies I'm doing much better, but with manufacturing companies my close rates are, sort of declining. What do I do? Because if we don't give feedback when a person is feeling this or asking this, it doesn't make sense, right? So that is the fourth part of it, that giving feedback when it matters in the context, or in the flow of work. The fifth part of it is that how does this actually culminate? Because at the end of the day, money matters. At the end of the day, people also want to understand how they can improve, perform, and how they are growing in their careers, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
performance management is a precursor to all of the talent management processes. So then the question is that, are we doing reviews? If we are doing reviews, at what frequency are we doing reviews? So here in this hypothetical example, series D company, one of the things which I have gleaned from, forward thinking HR leaders is that you shouldn't overload people at the very first go. Make them realize the value proposition first, right? Which means that
Okay.
if at first we do quarterly reviews, let's be very clear that there will be a significant change management effort, and people will be spending a significant time in doing those quarterly reviews. Now with Klaar, AI, etc., that time shrinks, but we need to be clear that people need to spend at
Yes.
least time which they were not spending earlier.
Yes.
So at what frequency will we do reviews and how will we do reviews, right? Which is where the linking of goals and not linking of goals comes into the picture. What I would suggest for a Series D company is that we should do reviews at least once in 6 months, because you will find that continuous feedback is great, but a mid year review sort of gives you a checkpoint to evaluate that, hey, 6 months went by, I was getting continuous feedback. Where are we, and what we need to change in the going 6 months, or in the upcoming 6 months?
And you recommend this should be a proper rating based mid-year review.
A mid-year review is really great for taking stock. It does not necessarily have to include a rating, right? Let's say we do a 360 sort of an approach, taking other
Mm.
people's feedback and including that in your taking stock sort of a conversation. That is a great value prop for a mid-year review, because again the outcome is we are giving feedback, which of course tells you how the last 6 months have been, but more or less we already know that because we have been doing continuous feedback. It is more if something we need to do drastically different in the upcoming 6 months. It is simply a taking stock sort of a mechanism.
The continuous feedback, is it one way or is it multiple directions? What would you recommend?
Great question. I would say it depends on the culture of the company. And what I usually espouse is definitely bidirectional, or even more, right? I
Mm.
should be able to seek feedback from people that I work with. I should be able to give feedback to people that I work with. And again, it depends on the culture. In some companies, um, you will find that we are only asking managers for feedback. Some companies I've seen, people are not even comfortable asking for feedback. It is only unidirectional coming in from the manager, right? But if I were to design it, and if that culture supports this sort of a thing, it should be multi-directional
Multi.
feedback.
Yeah. Got it.
So we are at the mid-year point. Now the question is again, if we are including ratings, etc., all of the things have a repercussion and all of them have their reasons, right? If we want to include ratings, we can absolutely go ahead and do that. The good point over here is then the annual reviews will definitely not come as a shocker, right? The bad point is that, or the detractor over here is that we've often found people get demotivated after mid-year
Yeah.
reviews, right? Then when we go ahead and do the end year review, here is where we have found companies differing a lot. Companies differ a lot in, are they going to include goals in your feedback, or is performance truly developmental in nature? The pros and cons are that if you are including goals in this particular one, you lend a certain measure of credibility and objectiveness, because goals ballpark would be, more objective in this particular case. The detractor over here is that we have found that performance discussions often end up just being where people ignore everything that is being said and they just focus on the compensation hikes, right? So, what is the outcome? That I have received X% salary increase, compensation increase. So, now we need to take a call whether we want to include goals, etc., or not.
If we don't include goals, then how would the performance appraisal look like? Like, it's you're just giving feedback. It's not feedback against every goal. We haven't even touched on values and competencies at this point, but it's just broad, general. I feel you've done
Correct.
this.
Correct.
Okay.
So, coming from India, even I was surprised because majority of Indian companies link goals, right?
Yeah.
But in the US, this is a proper divide where we have found that um,
Interesting. Okay.
goals are not linked. So it's not to say that you don't get feedback about your goals. You get feedback about your goals, and that is happening, on a more continuous basis, goal check-ins, etc. But they keep performance reviews decoupled. Reviews, in that they focus on, let's say, what you mentioned, values, competencies, more subjective feedback. What should you start, stop, continue? What were your wins, etc.? So I asked them that, why do you do this? Why do you not link goals? The answer was that we truly want the person to be focused on what is coming up next, right? And we truly want the person to improve, to develop, etc. And these are the inputs which will help. The moment we include goals, you will find, Ranak, that we are including the last 12 months. It definitely is the case because goals are
That's
what
true.
happened in the last 12 months, right? So
Mhm.
we don't want to do that. We want this to be a forward looking conversation, and goals has its own separate part, but this is your performance review or your performance feedback.
But then the science goes away and the math behind it goes away, right? Or is that also happening on the underlying background?
Yes, to some extent, yes. What I have seen is that it becomes a more subjective sort of a process. And here, if you're not doing continuous feedback, it becomes very difficult for people because
Mm,
essentially
makes sense. Yeah.
managers are just coming in after 12 months and saying that, hey, Sharthok, you did not do 1, 2, 3, you were good at 4, 5, 6, and so on. How did that happen? But if I have a precursor of continuous feedback which is leading
Yeah,
up to
then it
that,
makes sense.
it,
Mm,
it makes a lot more sense.
okay.
So that is designing that particular process, where what will be the flow, or evaluation parameters rather, that are we including goals, are we including values, etc. And finally, who will be a part of the process, how does it flow entirely, and again depending on the maturity of the company. So what I
Yeah.
would definitely do is not only just a manager and a self, I would probably also include peers. If you're not ready for direct reports, sometimes there's a little bit of resistance, at least include peers over there, and then get that particular feedback and communicate that to the people. Communication is a separate exercise altogether, even more than the process, more than the software. Last part which I will touch upon is, what do we do with the feedback, right? Which is essentially that, are we helping people become better? Are we devising individual development plans, or are we at least pushing them to do that? Are we only looking at ratings and doing calibrations and taking talent calls based upon them? That's the entire downstream activity for performance. But that is overall how I would design a process from the ground up, and we should be flexible to tweak that process when the time comes.
Before we end this thread, I want to go back to communication. That's an important one. What are the best practices that you've seen? Like the best way you've seen an organization do this?
There's a brilliant phrase I heard: performance feedback is a time of confirmation, not surprises. So
Yeah, I've heard
your
this. Yeah.
communication should reflect that. I mean, irrespective of how good a communicator you are, if your team member is surprised, there can only be two outcomes. They are, either happy surprised, more often than not, they are not so happy surprised, right? So the first pillar of communication is how frequently you're doing it throughout the year. It's not just about giving that in point feedback. Of course, that's important. So second point is, when you are communicating, make it non-adversarial. Whenever you're giving feedback, there's always two sides to it, and your feedback should have backing of data. What I mean by that is not only numbers, but if you have heard a certain theme, right? Please do not charge at that person with that theme, that, hey, I've heard from XYZ that you did not submit on your deadline, right?
Hmm.
And best way to deal with such things is that, hey, I have heard and I have also personally noticed that this is a theme. Am I completely off base over here? Even in sales, if you give a person a chance to respond and you make them feel like they are in control, the reception is much, much better. I go back to the book Radical Candor, right? Not just the book, the framework that give transparent, open feedback, which is meant to help the person. I'm not saying you have to be, magnanimous and not focus on your company objectives. Absolutely, you have to. But it should ultimately, at the end of the day, also help the person drive performance. So if we have these two to three pillars in our minds, the conversations become a lot easier.
Like I've seen
Absolutely.
managers navigate really shitty increments by doing, regular conversations and prepping them for it. Hey, brace yourself for zero.
Yeah.
And even if you get like a one, and
Yeah.
you walk out that, oh, I got a one. I'll give one interesting way I did it. I took a long walk with him. It
Yes.
had chai, and then what we
Correct.
couldn't cover in a room, we covered that over an hour just by walking and just exchanging notes. The conversation went really well.
There's another interesting nugget I realized that day, when one of our customers, she was telling me, have you noticed if there's a table in between, and if I sit on this side and you sit on that side facing each other, it it lends it lends a me versus you sort of a thing. For some people, maybe one of my managers, what they used to do was they got the chair and sat beside me, so I was almost sitting like this and my manager was facing like this, and we were on the same side. I don't know if that had an impact or not, but um, good thing to consider, like how seating arrangements also work.
I'll try that next time.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. Shadox, we've covered the whole redesigning of the performance process. Let's say the talent management guy is going to take this and run with it, but he's super ambitious. He's very
Yeah.
into AI. How do you bring in AI for good, for real, useful good in redesigning the performance process? What are the parts, steps? What can AI really come and really help?
So I'll tell you what Klaar is doing because it's a live example of the way we are seeing AI add value. Let's go back to continuous feedback, right?
Okay.
And in the US specifically, there are a lot of tools which have continuous feedback, right? What I hear from their customers, 90% of them, or even more, is that just giving me a tool which has the capability of sending feedback or requesting feedback does not make the process any lesser of a heavy lift.
Of
Why? There
course.
are multiple reasons to this. I am asking you to give feedback once every 7 days or 15 days. Unless you have insights to give feedback, what is that feedback which you will give? Right? So, essentially, what we found in all of these tools, what is happening is the continuous feedback is being almost relegated to like a status update, that, hey, I saw that there was a progress on this goal, well done. That is not continuous feedback. That you can do on a goal check-in as well, right? So the biggest use case of AI which we have found is how can you give managers the insights to give continuous feedback, and this happens via multiple ways, right? Where our approach, what we are doing is conversational agentic AI, where we are saying that, hey, we have your four or five things. We have your overall performance, what you're doing, your daily check-ins in all of your business tools, HubSpot, Jira, Notion, Salesforce, whatever. The third piece of the puzzle is now Klaar's agentic AI goes and asks intelligent questions at the right intervals of time. I'll give you a very practical example. Klaar's agentic AI goes and asks Sharthok that, hey, it's been X number of days. How confident are you of hitting your most important OKRs or goals? And I say that, hey, the market's tough. I'm 80% confident. Now, unless the AI would have asked this question and unless I would have responded, Ranak would have never known. Unless Ranak would have asked, which is rare because you're also bombarded with work. This then goes and feeds Ranak that, hey, Sharthok is 80% confident. You got 30 days remaining. This definitely should be a one on one thing which you discuss. Would you like to add to your one on one agenda in your next session? And you can add directly from there. What we are doing is we are giving you insights by which you can give continuous feedback and take actions. It becomes a virtuous cycle. You have that conversation and give that feedback, that person becomes better, and it becomes a cycle. Now you can ask me that, Charthuk, but you just said that salespeople till the 89th day, they don't say that I'm 80% confident. They will keep on saying 100%. Absolutely. Even if I say I'm 100% confident, Klaar's agentic AI can analyze my past performance, where I have done maybe at least till 70%. So then the input to Ranak is Sharthok is saying, like always, he's 100% confident, but his past performance, I think it'll be around 75%. We want to have a chat. Other similar approaches is that, again, we were discussing about taking 360-degree feedback into account, right? The AI should also ask about these things to your peers, to your direct reports, depending upon the customization which you do, so that again, that feedback is also not a surprise at the end of the year. It should truly be continuous. That if we are seeing that, it's been 60 days, 4 or 5 people are mentioning, hey, we don't feel that person has integrated well enough, or they see the company very differently. You don't have to wait till the 180th day to realize that this will be an early attrition. You can go ahead and have that sort of a conversation. Essentially what I'm getting at is you combine three things: the modules which usually don't speak to each other, make them speak to each other; the data sources where you are already working, your platforms, and the agentic AI, which then gives you output, so as the people get the help which they require in real time, managers get the insights to shed that help, and most importantly, it reduces bias at the end of the year.
Absolutely. I think the same thing you can extend to actual performance reviews, right? I know somebody who was doing that for an entire year. So the person was maintaining his diary in ChatGPT in one text prompt window. And
Hmm.
then when the time came during performance appraisal, it was a simple prompt.
So very soon you will find this in Klaar. That's the exact direction where we are going, where one-on-ones, it's already integrated with reviews, but the summarization, the bulk of it, exactly what happened during the goals, you will find this very soon.
Switching gears, you've been on the receiving end of this, I know, multiple times, but people who are in the people space, they are looking to get a talent management solution tool, right?
Yeah.
Now, one of the biggest things that people get wrong is people just go and take the tool. I'm on this side, I want to buy a tool. What are those checks and balances and my homeworks and to dos that I should do before I go out and, let's say, onboard and evaluate a tool?
Most people will start exploring tools as a silver bullet. The first thing to identify is, why do you think you need a tool? I'm probably shooting myself, on my foot, but I have advised so many companies that you don't need Klaar at this point in time. You're just starting out a process, make your process robust, run it on Excel sheets, no problem. Once you find that it is reaching a certain inflection point, then you can go ahead and get a tool. What do you need the tool to do? You need the tool to do how you want to run your process, how you are facing the challenges today, how you are going to overcome them, and how your process is going to evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. That is what you need the tool to do. So my biggest piece of advice would be, map out your entire process. What are the challenges do you face? How do you do the processes? Where have you got blocked? Where were you forced to go offline? Where did people crib? Entire end to end. And then when you go into the demo of the tool, it is you who is driving the discussion, not the salesperson throwing random flash at you. Because if you let me drive the discussion, I'll ensure that you buy into this tool, right? um, Klaar is one of the very few platforms that can map past L1 managers. If you feel that this has become a point of contention, that managers change very frequently and new managers don't have performance feedback, it should go into your notes, and you should ask that during the demo. And then you realize what your ideal tool is. Of course there are other things, security, etc., which all companies should look at, but you should be very clear what you want from a tool.
I'll just add one tactical thing to this. What Sharthok said, right? This is your whole process. An ideal way to do this is just add beside it the gaps process, the gap today, and
Yeah,
essentially your tool is trying to fill that gap, right? And no
absolutely.
tool will be able to do 100%. You have to be okay with that. Hey, 80% does this for me, and the other 20% will happen eventually. Last question, Charthak, before wrap up. And this is a completely different offbeat question. I know it doesn't go with the theme, but I'm really
All
curious
yours.
to get a founder's perspective on this. I know founders, good founders who I've worked with, amazing people, amazing at their work, working on something which is completely wrong, and I'm seeing it just going down the drain. The reality behind, the whole drama, the glitz and glamour. To
Yeah.
whoever, even if one person listens to this and takes a hard look at themselves, I'm not saying don't found startup, but at least know the truth. Right, that will be super helpful.
The problem statement you mentioned, right, that you think they are not working on the right things.
Mhm.
I would say you should tell them, because if they don't get feedback, they'll probably end up investing more time. But essentially, as a founder, what I believe very strongly is you should be good at preferably two, if not two, at least one thing. What is that? You should be able to sell and make money, plain and simple, right? um, Number one, your product should be solving a problem for which people are going to give you money. If your product solves a very niche problem which two people are feeling, chances are you're not going to end up making money, right? So you
Yeah.
need to make money. Solve a problem, sell, make money. The second one is, if that is not happening, you should be good at raising money. Raising money gives you that leeway, that you are not under immediate pressure to deliver. Of course you're under pressure, but immediately no. You, if you are intelligent enough, you will pivot. So both the things are very important. And the glitz and glamour, all of that is absolutely fine. You get your 5 minutes of fame when you're featured on some an article or whatever, but you're essentially saying no to a stable source of income, and you're jumping into the unknown, right? One thing I've realized is, I did also two startups before this, which failed, which didn't work. And I questioned myself, why was I doing those two startups? I did not identify with the pain points. I just wanted that glamour, that hey, he's a founder and he has raised so much money. If that is your motivation, um, difficult, very very difficult to sustain, because times will get tough, 100%. So and that glamour doesn't sustain you when times get tough.
I started up really long time back and failed.
You know the
And
grind. Yeah.
yeah, and one thing I can say, I mean, it's not 100% of the cases, but it's mostly turns out to be a net positive in the larger scheme of life.
Yes.
And it's better to start early than late.
Yes.
It's insane the condensed learning that you have in those years, and then the rest of your life, sort of, you can index on those learnings. But then again, yeah, those few years are tough when you look around you and your peers are getting 10x of what you are getting.
Absolutely
You're
correct.
going nowhere. It's a burden on your parents. Your health takes a massive downtake. But then again, at the end of the day, I guess it's all worth it. That's why you do it if you're doing it for the right reasons and if you've given it your best.
Yeah, if you have
Yeah.
that conviction in what you're doing, um, then it's easier to sustain.
Thank you, Sharthak. This was amazing.